Welcome back to The Pursuit of Me. So we're going to be talking today about authenticity. And Julie, you and I were, really talking about what is authenticity and what it means to have an authentic, place in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so while we were researching that, there was a lot of things that came up. And so I just want to share with everybody who's joined us. It's an interesting study. It came out from the Association for Talent Development, covering the value of authenticity in the workplace. So if you're watching, you'll be able to see the article I'm referencing. For those of you that are listening, you can listen along. It says employees value leaders who foster an authentic workplace that allows them to feel connected and aligned with the company's vision and goals. As Gen Z works their way up the corporate ladder, they are emphasizing the importance of authenticity more than ever. In fact, this is what I love, 92% of Gen Z survey respondents indicated that authenticity is the most important personal value, and this is according to Ernst & Young. This is a very reputable study, and I'm just, it doesn't surprise me, but it does. I mean, 92% of Gen Z, that's a lot.
92% of Gen Z is enough for you to change your corporate culture if you're trying to retain talent.
Right? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I think that's very interesting, and we see through the generations, whether you're Boomer, Generation X, Millennial, every generation has a goal that they're going for in life.
Yeah.
And so values obviously is something very important to Gen Z. And so if we're going to meet that workforce, that generation of workforce, there's going to have to be some level of meeting them there. So the paycheck is insufficient. There is a cause they're wanting to be a part of. And to them, that is being authentic because it is a part of them.
Yeah.
So it's important to them. So 92% is not a small amount. That's almost, everybody. Almost.
It's really not. And I think, for you and I, especially coming from the corporate space, we've talked about this in the last episode. It's like, there's so much that I think as leaders and executives, the culture really does need to take into consideration, like, what is authenticity? And part of that is, are we communicating like our vision and goals well? My background is marketing and advertising, and so this is just my own thing. But I think organizations just don't market themselves well as far as what culture they foster, what are the benefits. And then you have the Gen Z that's coming into the workforce and they're like, I don't want to be part of that culture. I don't want to be.
Well, that's probably because the cultures prior to them didn't value it as much.
Sure.
So the culture was set around, we're going to advertise ourselves and we're going to push what we're about. But everyone doesn't really care about that. Maybe there was a generation that cared about pension or 401k,
sure,
or benefits or PTO or what.
Those things do matter.
Yeah, that those are important things. Yeah. So I think, and that because the culture was created that way, what we're about maybe wasn't something. So it just needs to be a shift.
Sure.
A shift of things that probably have taken backseat or something you've done maybe once or twice a year, volunteer outreach or something. But now they want to know, Gen Z wants to know. And so I think just to retain the talent, for them to feel like they want to be a part of an organization, that's going to be a shift that we see in companies.
Yeah.
And it's going to be important because they want to align not only in their work life, but in the things that are personal to them as well.
Right. I think, thinking about corporations that are having a hard time finding talent, you would think that there would be a shift and have more of a focus on, creating that in an environment, because there are so many talented individuals that are coming up in the workforce, for them a hard time recruiting or developing them. And so, authenticity is something that I think we need to place some importance on, which is why we're talking about it today. There was one other study when we were looking at things that came up, I think you found in the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah, so I was in the Harvard Business Review. This is an article about a year and a half ago, but it was very interesting. And one of the issues that people brought up about authenticity is that they did not feel that they belonged in the room. And so what happens is when you have a group of people that in a company that don't feel like it's their place to say something, what's going to happen is you're never going to get authenticity because they're never going to speak up.
Sure.
If they feel like, well, I've spoken up, and this is the most common thing you'll see. I've said something before and they've brushed me off.
They feel maybe shut down,
yes.
like they don't have the ability to.
Correct. So what happens is they don't feel like they have a space at that table and they don't have space in that room to say anything, or maybe their status in the company, if they're entry level and stay in your lane. We have those type of thought processes. So I thought it was very interesting because if you don't feel like you belong in the room, you're not going to feel like you belong in the corporation.
Yeah, well, then what does that translate to? Work productivity, right? Is that it all kind of it's like domino effect,
Yes.
right? And so that authenticity is, if your leadership team, your bosses are fostering that kind of environment and giving you a place at the table, you're going to be more productive. You're going to be a happier employee, right? All of those things kind of translate.
Well, you get more buy-in.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to change something that's not working and your employees, you give them a space to speak up about that, they're
Mhm.
more bought in.
Yeah.
You get their buy-in because they see that you're trying to change it, you're
Mhm.
putting efforts towards it. But if you completely brush them off all the time, what you're going to get is that check in, check out. And there was this whole push, I think, prior to COVID, like bring your full self to work,
Yeah.
like bring your, there was this whole push for that prior to COVID. And it was like but people didn't feel like they could bring their full self to work.
Right.
And it wasn't allowed. It
Mm.
was, and so we talk about code switching a little bit here, where people, have to put their corporate personality
Sure.
together and come to work.
Mhm.
And you prep yourself. And I see a lot of memes on TikTok about this, like, the people that are sitting in the car and they're like, and they're prepping themselves because who they really are.
Takes more effort.
Yes,
Yeah.
who they really are, and it's exhausting.
Sure.
When you're having to be somebody you're really not, it's
Mhm.
gonna exhaust you.
Yeah.
So by the end of the day, when you've been back-to-back meetings, back-to-back emails, in your corporate email talk,
Mhm.
because that's what's professional, it's exhausting. And so
Sure.
it doesn't surprise me that people only stay at their jobs 2 years, and we move around a lot because the
Mhm.
culture is not indicative of accepting people for the way they are. And
Mhm.
then also, what does healthy authenticity look like?
Yeah. Well, with that too, in researching stuff, but just thinking about us as individuals, social media has such an impact on this because it's almost like there's an expectation of, if you're a professional, then you need to look this way, or you need to act this way, you need to dress this way. You should write your emails this way. And so it's having an awareness of who you are and how you want to communicate. Of course, in a professional manner, you're not trying to get fired tomorrow.
Yes.
Right. But it's an understanding. And so when you've got social media that's giving you this perception, a lot of times those may not be what's true for you as your authentic self, right? That might be someone else's authentic self
Sure.
or might not if it's
Yeah,
social media.
yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think social media has kind of skewed those lines of what authenticity is.
Right.
But also, we don't want people bringing, all their dirty laundry to work either.
Yeah.
So authenticity is not everyone, it's not overexposure.
Mhm.
It's not everyone knowing everything about you. That's not
Mhm.
what authenticity is.
Yeah.
And so I think people think being authentic is you're going to know everything about me, personal,
Mhm.
private. That's not necessarily what it is.
That's not what we're talking about. We're not saying bring it all to work and like let everybody
Yeah.
join in the mess of life that you have going on. That's not the case.
Yes, but I think it would be healthier because when one person becomes authentic, it's like a domino effect. Then people start
Yeah.
feeling more comfortable, and
Mhm.
especially if managers and leadership allow that type of environment, it creates better employees.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of misconception about what authenticity is. I think there's a lot of people talking and using that word.
Sure, but it's not like the the it thing. You and I talked about this.
Yes.
Authenticity is not the it thing, but it's so important because it does really have that domino effect.
Yes, and we live in the South. And so, not both originally from the South,
No.
but we're in the South. And I mean, I'm from the like Texas, but West. But either way, the South, we like courtesy, and nobody, the bless your heart thing is like legitimate. Like we don't really like authenticity.
I didn't know what that meant when I moved to the South, by the way. I'm like, why do they keep blessing me?
Yeah, that's not a compliment.
I
Like,
think they were saying bless me because I couldn't understand what they were saying. I
yeah,
think that's what it was.
yeah. So I think there's cultures
Yeah.
outside of just the corporate culture
Oh yeah.
of what everything is. Even when my family members would come to the South, they're like, everyone's so nice here, and they open the doors, and it's like it's and they're like everyone's so kind, and I'm like, they're like in New York, no one even talks to you. Just like, yeah, well, but so in the South, like authenticity, like we don't let our neighbors know what's going on.
Yeah, it's true.
There is like a culture there with that. No, I think we're coming away from that for sure, but definitely that's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I want to talk about, you and I, when we were discussing this episode and content for authenticity, was even identifying like being authentic through different seasons of life. like, being authentic now as a professional or as a mom or as, whatever your title is might look different from when you were being your authentic self at 18.
Yeah. So being authentic does not mean you have the same thoughts or beliefs or anything
Sure.
or view on life as you did 5 or 10 years ago. That's
Mhm.
not that authenticity.
And for some people, it might even be a year ago,
Yeah.
right? Because as you're
Yeah.
growing, as you're pursuing yourself, there's development.
And I would be afraid if someone said to me they've always been the same.
Mhm.
That would be scary to me.
Mhm.
Authenticity can be in seasons. You can be authentic to yourself, to what you knew, what you were aware of,
Mhm.
and then you've grown from that. You've learned things,
Sure.
you've experienced things, you've had conversations with people. There's empathy that's grown
Mhm.
in those seasons. So authenticity is not, oh, I had a belief when I was, 18 and I'm 55 now and I still believe that. Which if you do, that's great. But that's not what it means.
Mhm.
It's in the seasons of change that happen throughout life and the experiences, and as we encounter people and just things that have happened, even like world events.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you were here when 9/11 happened and how 9/11 affected you, it changed something.
Sure.
You remember where you were when that happened,
Mhm.
or whatever that may be for you personally as a person, how it changed something. So
Mm.
there's a change, there's an effect that happens. And so I think it's just people understanding being true to yourself is you're okay to be true to yourself, to the truths of what you have right now. And
Sure.
as long as you're willing to grow and understand more about what's happening within yourself and how you're experiencing the world, I think that's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, as you've joined us now for our second episode, and if you didn't catch the first episode, you can go back on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, to find that one, where we just kind of laid the foundation of what the pursuit of me is all about. But authenticity is such an important piece of that, which is why we're here discussing it now. But, as you were talking about not being the same person as you were like when you're 18 or something, I just had this picture of what would it be like if we went to like a 20-year reunion and the people that you do in high school, they were still the same.
Hmm.
Like, that's hopefully, that's not where we're all at. We're evolving and we're changing and we're adapting, hopefully to be a better individual and a better communicator, all these different things. And that's what authenticity is about,
Yeah. And
growth.
yeah, it is about growth and it's about your personal growth and
Absolutely.
what you've learned through seasons. Like, can you sit down and just talk to some people and be like, hey, like, I know you're younger, but these things will happen.
Mhm.
And the perseverance of that and what
Mhm.
you've learned in those seasons. And hopefully you haven't become bitter and angry and resentful. Hopefully those are not the things that you've gained
Sure.
in that season, but hopefully understanding and like, why did that happen? What did I
Mhm.
learn from that? And I think just growing in that aspect is healthy. And authenticity also is, you know, not only being true to yourself, but it does create healthy boundaries for yourself.
Mhm.
And in just understanding, like, hey, like, that's not me.
Yeah.
When you outgrow, and people know this, when you outgrow friends, right?
Mhm.
When you outgrow friends, it's nothing personal. It's the personal growth that you've experienced.
Sure.
Then you outgrow them. And then there's like this you have nothing in common anymore. And there's like this tension there,
Yeah.
and then do you just go out with them because they've been your friends for so long? Or do you stay authentic to this new
Sure.
discipline or these new things that you've created for yourself that are obviously healthier and more balanced?
Mhm.
Where does that line and how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation
Mhm.
for sure. I think one thing we've talked about is with authenticity, it takes being vulnerable. And being vulnerable sometimes is something that we shy away from because vulnerability is hard. It makes us look in the mirror and identify maybe the things that look a little yuck in the mirror. And so being willing to be vulnerable is part of that journey to pursuing yourself and being authentic. And so it's not always an easy thing. And if we take this and we kind of point back to the corporate workplace, corporations, are they looking at how they can improve in this area? And if they're not, gosh, Gen Z is certainly looking for that and they're looking for a place to work. So, maybe you guys are seeing some of this in your workplaces. We'd love to hear from you. You can comment wherever you're watching, or if you're listening on podcast, you should be able to find a link somewhere there and reach out to us. We want to hear, what are you experiencing in the workplace? What do you wish was there? And hopefully, with the pursuit of me, this journey we're on together, it just opens the door to have a conversation. And the reason why we want to hear from you is because sometimes we just need a place to share. Right? That's what this is about.
And I would love to hear about what areas you can't be authentic.
Yes.
I would love to hear that. Like when you go to work, what are you hiding?
Mm,
Or what can you not talk about? or
Mm,
what can you not express? What are those type of things where you feel like if you do,
mm,
there might be some repercussions, like you may not get the promotion. I mean, I've had friends tell me that, like, I
yeah,
can't let them know this.
sure.
If they know about this, then I'm not going to get promoted. And
Yeah.
so, where do we draw the line with that? Like, what does that look like? And I don't know if that's still going on. I've been out of corporate for a few years now, but like, is that still going on?
Mm,
And how do we cultivate that a good environment for what's authentic and what's acceptable?
sure.
And because Gen Z is not gonna like they're not compromising in that way. I think it's a good thing for the
I do
change
too.
in culture.
Yeah.
They get a lot of heat. Gen Z gets a lot of heat for some stuff, but I think being authentic, they're being more authentic than we were. We had the opportunity to be. You
Mhm.
know, I feel like I think it's a good and positive change that's happening. But how do we help them?
Sure.
How do we help in that?
Yeah. One of the other things we're going to be talking about on the pursuit of me is just the different generations that are now in the workforce. You have, was it 5
Hmm.
generations? Maybe sometimes 6. I actually was talking to one of my old colleagues and
Yeah.
you got to talk with him. He actually has a podcast and interviewed someone who's in the workforce and she's in her 90s and she
Hmm.
goes to work every day. She's dressed to the nine and she's ready to go. And so it's so funny to think about someone who's in the workforce for that length of time, but is just thriving in life.
Hmm.
And then you also have Gen Z that's in the workplace. And so there really does have to be, we do have to address how do we as an organization cultivate an environment for people to be themselves professionally, of course, and contributing to the overall organization and needs of the organization. But I think more and more now, what we're recognizing is that organizations do need to consider this. This is an important thing, especially when you want to bring in new talent or retain the talent. So you're not experiencing that churn.
Yeah, and also in the 80s, 90s culture of corporate America is what you had to offer was based on what your position was and what your title was.
Mm,
But that's not the case anymore. Even coming in entry level, you see people brilliant. They have a lot to offer.
yeah.
But if they're not given the opportunity to offer that,
Hmm.
then what are we doing? How are we cultivating, people like that? So I think there has to be a space that we create
Hmm.
for them to be authentic, heard,
Sure.
like they need a voice
Yeah.
in what's going on and not to be brushed off. But I think it's going to be very interesting with the economy right now.
Mhm.
What is going to happen?
Mhm.
Who's going to stay afloat? Who's going
Yeah.
to sink and swim? And I think it's very interesting. And, um, Gen Z is not tied down with student loans and all these things. So they have choices.
Hmm.
And if the culture is not healthy and it is bringing them a lot of stress, or they will go.
Yeah.
And if your values don't align with what they're really pushing for, they don't want to stay either. So we as companies need to think a little bit more about what that looks like and what authenticity looks like and creating that space looks like.
Yeah. I think when we were talking just about some of the highlights for this episode in particular, you mentioned one thing that just kind of stood out to me is that's going to make all the difference of the companies who actually stay and the companies that kind of over time are just no more. You don't want that, of course, for any organization. However, if they're not evolving and developing the people and retaining the talent and giving a space for everybody to have a seat at the table. And I'm not saying that every employee on different levels, they all need to be at the executive table. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that people do need to have a place where they can be authentically themselves and have a place to be heard and to contribute.
Yeah,
When you are heard, you're able to contribute in a positive way.
absolutely.
So if this content on this episode resonated with you, we want to hear from you. Or if you're experiencing things in the workplace that's just like, gosh, this just was so frustrating, we want to hear about it. We want to share it more with folks that are tuning in to the podcast. But thank you so much for joining us. You can like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, and we're actually on all streaming and social media platforms. And then wherever you're listening for your podcast, you can catch us there as well.